In this video, we will be building a clone of Reddit. So we will be taking the core features of Reddit and try to build this in Ruby on Rails. And before we get into the video, I want to give a shout out to my sponsor, Scout APM. Scout APM makes it easy to track down bugs in your code and eliminate performance issues, N+1 queries, and lots of other things. So do check that out in the description below. I have a link there where you can get a 14-day free trial. So looking back at the reddit.com website, we can see that there are multiple communities or subreddits, and within each of those communities there are multiple posts which we can upvote, downvote, comment upon. So all of these great features we will be trying to build into our application. So let's get into this and set up a new Rails application. So I'm running Rails new, so we'll call our app Reddit clone, and this will take a few minutes to install. So let's leave this running to handle all the gem downloads that we need for our application. So once it's complete, we can open up the directory in our code editor. And by default, Rails sets up a Git repository for us. So I'm going to add all the files to the Git repo. So I'll leave a message to say that we are initializing the repository. So all the files are now committed to Git. Now it's a completely optional step, but it just helps us to keep all of our files in version control. So now I'm going to modify the database file. So the file within config, I'm going to set the database type as postgres. Now you can use SQLite for this, but my preference is generally postgres because in the production environment I use postgres, and I like to keep the production environment in sync with the dev environment. So I'm going to set this up real quick. And in our gem file then we are going to add the PG gem for Postgres. So I'll just remove the version for now. So you'll see that in our main directory we have a file called Ruby version. So .ruby version, and this is where we identify the version of Ruby that we're using. But we can also add a file called Ruby gemset, and I like to do that because it allows me to separate the code base for each of the applications that I build. Normally when I begin a project, I will create a new gemset. So I'll do this using Ruby Version Manager, and the reason I like to do that is when we are using the same gem for different projects, we may have different versions of that gem that we need based on the version of Rails that the project is using or the version of Ruby. So it's good to have a separate gem set to isolate that code base. And that's something we haven't really talked about in the previous videos, but just adding it here so that you guys know how I approach that. So you can actually build a project without using Ruby Version Manager, but it just makes it easier if you're working with multiple applications. So the next step I'm going to take is to set up the devise gem. So devise is used for signing in or creating new accounts in our application. So let's add the gem to our gem file. And now we'll run the bundle install to make sure that gem is installed. So now we can run the generate devise install command. So this will create the files we need to get devise set up correctly. So it has given us some instructions here in the terminal. So we have to paste this into our environment development file. So let's open that up now. We'll paste this in. So now let's go to our routes file and set our default path for our homepage. And it is prompting us here to add these notifications to our template, but we're going to leave that for now. But we will add this Rails generate devise command. So this will give us our views that we need to be able to edit our sign up pages or sign in pages. So we can open up the devise file within our config initializers folder. And in here we can set up an email address that would be the default sender email. So now let's go ahead and create a controller. So this will be a public controller for our homepage. So we can just copy this, say that the public controller is inheriting from our application controller. And we'll add a method in here for the index. So let's create a new folder for the views. So this will be a public folder. And we'll create the default view, which will be our homepage. Let's call this index.html.erb. And we'll add some dummy text here just to get this started. So now let's run the Rails application and test this out. So at this point we can see that we have not got the database set up yet. So let's do that now. So let's run Rails db setup, and that will create the databases we need. And it also tells us here that we need to run Rails db migrate. So running the Rails db migrate command will allow us to generate a schema file. So that will give us the most recent version of how our database stands. So we can open that up now, and we'll see here that there's nothing in here yet, and we're at version 0. So every time we do a migration on our database, this version number will increase. But if we reload the browser now, we should get the updated page, and we can see here that our homepage is now working. So now we will create our first devise model. So we'll use the Rails generate devise, and we'll call this model account. Now you can call this user or whatever name you want here, but for me, I like to just stick with the same naming convention for multiple applications. So I usually call most of these devise. So I normally call the devise model accounts. So now within our migration file, I'm going to add some additional values in here, some additional columns. So we'll record the first name, the last name, and a username. And we can also add a bio here, just some details about that user. So this would be a text field. So now let's run this migration to add these fields to our database. And now if we open the schema file, we will see that our table has been created. So now I'm going to go back to our application layout. And in here I will include a partial for the header. And we can also add one for the footer. So let's just correct the name and the title. So now I will create these partials that we have added to our application. Create a header, and we'll just put some dummy text. We'll do the same for the footer. And now once we reload, we can see that each of these files are being loaded properly. So now let's add Bootstrap to our application. So we'll use Bootstrap to handle the layouts of our front-end view. So Bootstrap has been installed using Yarn. Now in our application.js under the packs folder, I'm going to add the required Bootstrap to ensure that that gets compiled into our JavaScript file. So I'm going to test to see if this has been installed correctly. So I'll put some dummy code here using Bootstrap markup. So I'll use the classes from Bootstrap just to see if it's loading correctly. And we can see here in the browser that it's not splitting it into columns like it should be. It is giving an entire row. So it looks like the style sheet has not been added yet. So let's add that now. And we can paste this in. So if you go to the Bootstrap installation instructions, they will show you what file to include in your style sheet. I'm just going to paste that in. And we will rename this to SCSS. So it has to be a SAS file, not a CSS file. But looking at the console here in the browser, we can see that we still haven't got jQuery, and Bootstrap requires jQuery to be installed. So let's use Yarn to add jQuery now. So going back to the browser, let's reload, and we'll see that now the error has disappeared. So we have jQuery installed, and the style sheet for Bootstrap is working. So let's go ahead and add some actual markup for our header. So we'll create a top navigation bar, and we'll use the generic markup for Bootstrap to do this. We'll have a title for the Reddit clone, and we want to also have a sign in and sign up link. So we'll add that to the top bar as well. Let's create a div and float it to the right, and this will be our sign in, sign up buttons. And we'll use the new account session path. And then we'll add some styling to this using the Bootstrap classes. So we'll add the button and the button outline class. And this one will be the sign up. And for this one, we need to have a new account registration path. Now these paths you can get using the Rails routes in the terminal. So just looking back at the Reddit site, we will have a 2-column layout. The left column will be about 8 columns wide and then 4 columns on the right. And we'll also have the trending section at the top, so it will be 4 columns wide. So this is our homepage view, the public index view. And here on the left column will be 8 columns wide. So that will be the main area where all the posts are. And the right section will be 4 columns wide. So the top section will be 4 columns times 3 columns, adding to a total of 12 columns. So let's just add some dummy data to get this layout right first. So this would be the left column, that's our main section of the page. Sidebar will show our communities, and we'll have the trending section just above that. And we will also add a title here at the top. This will say, so we'll add a heading here just to say that this is trending content. So create a H2. And when we check this out in the browser, it's looking okay so far, but we want to add a little bit of padding to the top, space things out a little bit. And we can probably make this trending header smaller too. And maybe this could be a paragraph. And we'll give it a class. It's a class of H4, heading 4 style. So we'll also have a heading at the top of the main section on the homepage. And this one will be popular posts. So now we have a very basic layout for the homepage. It's very simple right now, but just a starting point for us to get something together. Let's add a little bit of a border to the bottom of this. Add some padding to the bottom too. And then we'll add some margin also, just to space the content underneath. Okay. We can also add some margin to the top of this main section. And for this sidebar, we can say up and coming communities here. So this will be communities that have got a lot more members recently, and we want to feature them here on the sidebar. So that's how it is on the main Reddit website. So let's try to imitate that. So here I want to create a list, and I'm going to use the list groups from Bootstrap. So I think it looks pretty close to what's on the Reddit website. So let's just copy and paste this section, and then we will modify it. So I think we can remove this inline style tag. It looks pretty okay right now. It's good enough for us to start with. So at the bottom of this list, we will add a link to view more communities, or view all the communities. So let's add some margin to the top of this button to space it from the categories above. So now let's begin creating some of the tables we need for our data. So let's create a new migration for communities. So I'll add a name for the community and a URL. So now within our migration file, let's add the timestamps. So when a community is created or when it has been last updated. So that timestamps will record those automatically for us. And we'll also add an integer value for the total members in this community. So members will be able to subscribe to each individual subreddit or community. And we can also add a text field value for rules for that community. So we may want to add additional columns to this table later, but I think this is enough to get us started. So let's go ahead and run the Rails DB migrate to add this new table to our schema file. And now we will just sign up for a new account to test the account creation process by devise. So add some dummy details here. So that has created an account, and we're actually signed in at the moment, but we want to show different buttons here at the top if we're signed in. So if we're signed in, we want to show a sign out link. So let's add a condition here in the header file for this, the header partial. So we'll say if the account is signed in, And if you were using a user model instead of an account model, that helper would be if user signed in. But in our case, it's account signed in because we called the model account. If the user is signed in or the account is signed in, we will have this sign out link. So let's set this up now. So this would be destroy session path, destroy account session path. And the sign out path uses the delete method. So the verb is delete. So we'll add that. And we can check this in the routes. So we go to our terminal and type Rails routes. We can see the path for the sign out link. So we have this destroy account session, and you'll notice here that the verb is delete. So that's why I'm adding that delete into the link. So by default, links use the get method. So the verb would be get, but we need to declare it as delete in this particular example. So the sign out link has worked, and we will sign back in again to test that process. So now let's have a look at the communities. So I have this section for communities, but we did create a migration for that. But I do want to add one more thing to the migration. So a community is created by one of the members. So we want to record the member or the account that creates a community, as they will be able to edit it later, such as the name, the description. So we'll roll back our migration first, and we'll add a reference to the account model. So let's go back to our migration, and we'll add a new column here for references, and it will reference the account. So then we'll run our migration once more. Now we will set up a new controller for the communities. So the communities controller will inherit from the application controller, and we'll create some methods in here. So create an index method. We will create a show method once someone clicks on that community. We'll also have a create method and a new method. For some of the methods in this controller, we want to limit the access to them. So we want to make sure that the user is signed in at the very least. So this authenticate account helper gets called by default on all of the methods in this controller, but we can list exceptions by passing a parameter for that. So now let's create our views for the communities. Create a folder called communities, and we will add a index file. We'll also add a new .html file, and we will have a form. So the form will be for creating new communities, and we'll have a show view to list all of the posts in that community. So now we'll go ahead and create a new model for the community. Call this community.rb, and this will be a class with the first letter capitalized. So in Ruby, we capitalize the first letter of classes. So we'll have in here a belongs to account, and we will validate some fields We'll validate the presence of the URL, the community name, and the bio of that community. So just to make sure that these fields are present before the model actually saves. So in the communities controller now, we will load the communities in the index method. So if we go back to the index view in the communities views folder, so we'll iterate over the communities and output the name of the community. So let's output the community.name. We'll copy that, and we will also output the bio. And we'll use a simple format helper to output this as paragraph. So we'll wrap our community name in a heading tag, and we can enclose all of this inside a div. So we'll also need to add the communities within the routes file. So we'll use the resources command to do that. So resources will create all of the default routes for us, such as the create, new, show, and delete methods. So we'll automatically create these routes for us. So we'll check our routes now using the reg routes command, and you can see all the new routes are available to us. So let's add a link to this heading tag for the community name. We'll add the path, so it'll be the community path. And we'll also add a link then to the view all communities on our index, our homepage view. Let's try this out. And we're getting an error here saying that the community's value is not being set. So this instance variable is not being set right now. So let's have a look into why this is happening. In here we've got communities equals community.all. So I'm going to wrap a conditional statement around this block of code. We're going to say if the community dot size is greater than 0. So if there are any communities, we'll execute this code, and then otherwise we'll output a message to the browser saying there are no communities to display. So let's go back to our controller now. We can see that we're loading from this community model. We'll have a look at the model, see if we can spot anything. And it looks like we have forgotten to add the inheritance from the application record in our model. And this doesn't seem to be solving the problem itself. Now, it was a mistake that we made before. We missed adding that inheritance, but there is still another issue. But for now, we'll keep going. We'll add a new view for creating a new entry. Maybe it will shed some light on where we went wrong. So we'll create a new partial for loading the form. And we'll just go directly to that URL. So let's see what's happening here. So go to our form view. And we'll input a new form here. Say form 4. And this will be for the community instance variable. And we'll add a value for this form helper. So we'll call this form, and we'll close this using the end tag. So this adds some fields to this form. So let's add a label for the name, and we'll add a field to capture this name value. So form.text field name, and we'll add a class from Bootstrap, so we'll use the form control class. And let's wrap this in a div. So we'll add the class form group. Let's try this out. So we're still getting a problem here for the community, loading of the community. So let's add this into our controller, see if this solves it. So it's still returning a nil value every time we try to load this community model. And it looks like we've made a naming mistake here to one of our callback methods. So this should be before action, and then it runs the authenticate account. So now we're getting the no communities to display. So we haven't got any communities entered into our database yet. So that does sound better than what we were getting before. So let's go back to our view now. So at the top of this file, we're going to check to see if the user is signed in. And if they are signed in, we'll give them the option to create a new community. So we'll say create new community, and then we'll pass in the new community path along with the classes from Bootstrap. So we're going to use the button class, and we'll create a blue outline around this button. So this is not going to be a button that you will use frequently. So I think we can use the outline to style this so that it's not right in our face. So let's test this out. So I'm going to jump back into the application view, and we will add a container and a row to this view. We'll move the yield up inside of this content. We can add a column here too to fill the row. So this will be column small 12, so we'll fill the entire width of this row. So this is just some markup from Bootstrap to give the layout some structure. So now let's click this link, and we've got a new community form, but there's no fields showing right now. So let's go back to our form view. So let's add a submit field onto this form just to see if we can see it on the front end. And again, we're not seeing it, but the reason for that is that we forgot to include the equal sign at the top of this file. So I need to output the form tag. So if you don't have that equal sign, nothing within this block of code will load. So it's very easy to make these mistakes, so you have to be very careful. So let's add some markup to this to wrap around this. So we want to make the form only half the width of the window. It's very large fields right now. So it's a little bit better. So I'm going to duplicate this code and create some additional fields. So let's add the URL. And we can also add in the bio. So make this a text area tag instead of a text field. We'll change the label name also. So let's test this out. And if we look on our server logs, it looks like we have an error here for the word bio, the field bio. So I think we've maybe got mixed up somewhere along the way. So if we look back at the schema to see how things look, and in our communities, we don't have a bio field, so we have a rules field. So let's change this. So I think we have a bio field on the account model, but not on the communities model. Okay, so that's working now. We've got the rules, we've got the URL and the name. So let's write the code for this create method. So before we do that, we want to set strong params. So we will populate the values using this method. So we will say params.require. I'm going to require the community, and then we'll permit the name, URL, and the rules. So So that's the values that we are allowing to be passed from the browser. So then within the create method, we will set up a new instance variable called community. So this will load a new model instance, so community.new, and it will pull the values based on these params that we are whitelisting using the method at the bottom of this file. And then we will run the community.save, and if it saves, then we will redirect the user back to the community's path. And if it doesn't save, then we will render the new method again. So that will be that form that they were at previously. So we'll populate the values there so that they can make the correction if there's some mistake in the form that they filled out. So before we do that, we will also save the account ID based on the current user that is signed in. That's a current account in this case, and we'll use the ID value from that. So let's test this out now. So create a new community called webdev, and we will create a URL and some basic rules for the community. So when we look at the server log, we can see there is a problem saving this file. So it's saying that undefined method bio. Again, we have a mistake in our model, so we can remove this field. So we're validating the presence of the rules instead. Let's reload the page and see what happens. And we check our server log. It looks like it is saving the value this time, but in our show view there is also a reference to this bio. So let's go back and fix this in the show view and we'll get this thing working. So this time everything appears to be working. We have our new community. So now let's set up our show view so that we can actually click on this community and get some details about it. First, let's create a method to load the community that we are clicking on. So in this case, we will use the find method on that community to load that community by the ID that gets passed in. So we will be calling this method from the before action filter. And we want to use this for the show view. So when we click on this new community link, we don't get any details right now, so we have to add values to the show view. So let's go back to our views for the community. We'll open up the show view and we'll output the basic details about this community. So we'll output the name and we will also output the rules. And we can use simple format to add the proper paragraph tags and layout for this rules value. So one thing to note here is there's no way to get back to the home page right now. So let's add a link to get back to the home page. So go back to our header file, and this Reddit clone text we will turn into a link. So that will go back to the root path. So once we click on this now, we're back to the home page, and now on the right side we will modify this list of communities. So we'll just pull in the new communities. So we can copy this from the communities controller and just paste it in. And we'll limit this to 5 communities. So I know at the moment we only have one community, one test community, but we can limit this to 5 so that once we add more, we'll only be pulling in 5 communities here. And we'll iterate over these communities and output the name as part of this list. Let's delete some of these entries. We'll add the community name. So let's reload the browser and we can see the new community has been added. So let's add a link to this. So this link will point to the community path. We'll also need to pass in the community variable. So when we click on it, now we get directly to that community, so that's good. So next, let's look at creating posts. So posts will belong inside the community. So let's create a new migration for this. So let's add a title, which will be a string. And the post will also have a body. So this will be a text, a longer text field. And we can start with this for now. So let's open up our migration file. And in here we can also add the references. So we want the post to belong to an account. And we also want it to belong to a community. And then we will also add the total upvotes for that post. We'll also keep a record of the downvotes. And finally, we will add the timestamps. And one other thing we can add here actually is the total comments on this post. So now let's run this migration. And we will create a new model for the post. So the post will inherit from the application record. We will validate the title field, the body field, and the account ID, and also the community ID. So these are the values that we want to ensure exists before a post is created. So while we're looking at the validation, I just realized that we have forgotten to set some default values for these total comments, downvotes, upvotes. So let's roll back and update our migration file. So by default, I want to have the total comments be set to 0. I also want the total upvotes and downvotes to be 0 to begin with. So that way we are always guaranteed that it has got a number value. So let's run the migration once again. Now we will say that the post belongs to an account and it also belongs to a community. So now we will go back to the community model and we'll say the community has many posts. And we'll also go to the account, so our user account, and we'll say that the user account has many posts. And the user can also have many communities that they have created. So now I'm going to take the code from the communities controller and I'm going to copy it and paste it into a new file here. So we're going to create a post controller. So we'll paste this in and we will just remove some of the values and replace it with posts. So mostly the basic functionality will be the same here. We want to list the ability to list the posts, create new posts, all the standard procedures here. I'm just going to find and replace the values. I'm replacing the community value with the post value. And you could actually use the Rails generate controller in the terminal to generate most of this boilerplate code, but I think it's pretty quick to just replace it this way. So it just takes a couple of minutes. We'll replace the code and most of the functionality should be the same here anyway. We're just changing the field values, the column values that we are allowing to be saved. Once a user creates a post, we will redirect them back to the community in which they created that post for. So we can do that using the post.communityID, passing that into the community path. So now let's create our views folder for posts. And in here we will add our form partial. And we will also copy this code from the community form and we'll just modify it. So the name will be changed to title, and we have a body for this post. We use a text area for the body. So let's add a new file for the new post that we create. So in this new file we will load the partial for that form. We'll also create a new file for the edit. So when you edit that post, so it's going to be almost the same, we're just changing the wording in here. And then finally we will have a show view for the post. So here we will output the title of the post. And we'll also add the post body. So we'll use the simple format for the display of that so that it adds the correct paragraphs. So now in a routes file, we will add the resources link for the posts. So generate all the paths, all the routes for that post. So the next thing we will do here while we're in the resources is to embed or nest these posts within the communities. So a community will contain the posts within it. So having the nested routes does mean that we will need to update our views. So going back to our posts form, so in here we will have to modify the values for the form for tag. So we'll need to include the community along with the post, since we are generating the URL containing both of these parameters. So going back to our post controller, in the new method we will also need to set the community. So we can do that using the params, and we'll use the community ID from the params. And since this is not something we do that often, we can check the routes just to confirm what our path is going to be for each of these posts. And we can see here that they are named as new community post. So we're combining the community and the post in the one path. So in this case, we can see the community ID is embedded in the URL as a parameter. So we're using that parameter here to load the community as an instance variable. So we'll say community.find, and then we'll select it based on the parameter. So now let's go back to the show view for our community, and here we are going to add a link to create a new post. So we'll say create new post, and the path will be the new community post path. And we'll need to pass in two values into this. Actually, we'll just need to pass in the community value. So that will be part of the URL. So we'll give it a class of button and a button primary, and we'll float this link to the right of the page. So let's click on the community and see how this looks. So as you can see on the right of the page, we have this new post button now. And at the top of the URL, you can see that there is an ID here for the community. So what happens here if we click on the submit button without entering any values? So we can see that it won't be saved because our validation is kicking in. But we do have this community ID being set as one of the parameters. So it's not within the post parameter, but it is set by itself. It's part of the URL. So we can go back to our controller, and in here we will want to populate this community ID. In this case, we're just taking it from the params. We're adding it to the post. And the issue we're facing here is that if the post is not saved, then it is calling this new method. So loading the form again, but the community instance variable that we have here as part of the form is not being set. So what we can do to fix this is to copy the community code from above and paste that in here. So if the post doesn't save, we will load this community instance variable, and that will populate the form tag for us. So now when we submit the blank tag, it will still return the proper form to us. So let's test it out with the real content now. And it looks like it is saved correctly. You can see that it's been input, and we are storing the community ID, which is great. So now we can load these posts as part of this community. So now we're on the community show view. So we can output the posts that are attached to this community. So to do this, we will add some code into the show view for the community. We will iterate over the posts for that community. So let's say link to post.title. We'll pass in the path. So let's wrap this in a heading tag. And we'll also output the body of the post, but we want to truncate that, so we'll only output some of the post content. So we'll use a helper for that, truncate helper. And we'll wrap this body of the post inside a paragraph tag. And we should also update our path to include the community. And we're also missing the length parameter here for this truncate. So let's pass that in, length 200. So that will be 200 characters long, the body of this post. So now within our communities controller, so for the show view in the communities controller, we're going to load the posts based on the community. So it's like community.posts, and you can see here now that these are output to the browser. So it's very simple at the minute, very basic information being output. But just to wrap this video off, we are going to include some posts on the homepage. So we'll pull those in on the homepage to show some of the latest posts that have been made on the platform. So for this community rules, we're probably going to move that into a sidebar later, but for now it's fine. Just leave it here. So let's go back to our public controller. And in fact, we can output the code for this first in our view. So we can actually copy this from our communities show view. So we wrote this earlier for outputting the posts. Let's paste this in. And we'll wrap this in a div. call this card. We'll give this a class of card. So this is the bootstrap class to give an outline around this div. So now, finally, within our public controller, we will load in the latest posts. So I'm going to load these posts by order, so reverse order by ID. Then we'll limit this to 20 posts. So once we try to load this again, if we open up our terminal, we can see that there is a problem here. This code we pasted in, it looks like one of the values is not set. So in this case, the community is not set as an instance variable, but we can load that from the post.community. In fact, we'll pass it in the community ID just to prevent from having to load that record from the database. So we can see that now works. And we can click on that to get through to that post. So I'm just going to add a little bit of padding around this post, as it doesn't look so great at the moment in terms of the design. I'm just going to add a basic padding around it. And that's going to do it for this video. There will be a part 2 of the Reddit clone where we try to tidy things up and round things off. If you've enjoyed this video, do make sure to subscribe to the channel for more Ruby on Rails content. And if you would like to learn more about securing your Ruby on Rails applications, make sure to check out my sponsor for this video, Scout APM. So they have a service that allows you to track errors in your code and eliminate performance issues and really just make your application more secure in general. So check out the link in the description below for a 14-day free trial. But other than that, I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and I will see you all in the next video.